Hello, my name is LIMIN with the Human Responsibilities Tribunal. Thanks for joining us again. Today is our second in our series of Lonesome Dove Limitations, where we explore different ideas, characteristics, and personalities through the lens of the Lonesome Dove tetralogy by McMurtry. I'm joined today again with my husband, Chris, and we'll be talking from the book Lonesome Dove, which is the third in this chronologically in the series, but the first book to be released. Hi, Chris.
Hello.
Thanks for coming again.
It's great to be here for another limitation on probably what's become my favorite book.
Although, yeah.
Very close.
Although it's seeming like we talk about a lot of things through the lens of this series.
We do. A lot of it, I think a lot of what we encounter in this book, and even as we are kind of re-listening to the audiobook version for like the 20th time, more things keep popping out and keep kind of standing out. Not only just cool, interesting things from the book, but things that we can kind of keep directly tying into not only our lives and where we're at, but things going on in the world right now too, and all the great lessons that this book has to teach kind of seem to apply. So.
It's really interesting. So yesterday, or maybe it was the day before, you really surprised me with this interesting idea. So Chris is a musician, for those of you who don't know. It's one of the things I fell in love with over 20 years ago, was his musical talent. But he's going to be making music for this Lonesome Dove. The original music on this Human Responsibilities Tribunal is actually our son's music, which is interesting, which I'm using without his knowledge. Sorry, son. Oh. Anyway, when we were talking about music and what we thought the music around this series would sound like, Chris came up with this really neat idea that explores the characters in a way different context that I never would have thought of because I'm not a musician.
Yeah. Well, okay. We'll see how it sounds. My kind of goal, what I'm going to try to come up with, I'm just going to take some of the main characters of the book. So first and foremost, I guess Augustus, or Gus. And my thought was, well, hey, Gus starts with a G. Just so happens one of my favorite guitar tunings is the key of open G, and for any guitar players who might be watching this, you can mess around with lots of different open tunings on a guitar, and they all kind of have like a different sort of a sound and a flavor to go along with them, right? So the key of G, it's actually been used plenty of times by bands like Led Zeppelin. It's got a kind of a cool sort of a country-ish type of sound, and oddly enough, a cool sort of Tennessee type of sound, which just happens to be where the character of Gus comes from.
Wow.
So that's kind of one idea for Gus. The other main character, Woodrow Call. So of course, Call, see where this is going. I'm going to try it in the key of C, for C for Call. Key of C is also fairly, it's kind of tough to describe. Call is a moody character. He's also really driven. He's the stoic, right? So there's plenty of little musical ideas I could come up with for Call, maybe in the key of C, maybe C minor perhaps. Dietz being the other one, key of D. I'm going to try that for open D. Yeah, that was just kind of the idea. Jake Spoon as well, but there's no key of spoon. We'll figure something else for that. Maybe that'll just be a standard tuning for spoon.
That's interesting.
We'll keep with the alphabet theme, but see where that goes. It'll be an interesting thing to explore.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting just to come up with the idea or what have you. So that'll be interesting. Any musicians out there, if you have any interesting ideas around how you take literature and make it your own, or how ideas flow through that modality, it'd be really interesting to hear about that from you. Anyways, also today, you decided which quote we're going to take a look at and which scene we're going to take a look at from the Lonesome Dove book. And you said we're kind enough that you'd read it because you're actually a better reader than me out loud.
Yeah, or as they say in the book, I'm a better mentioner. Mentioner. Well, we were once again listening to the audio version of the book. This kind of little passage just stood out once again because I think in this day and age, one thing we routinely keep going back to is the theme of leadership and leadership in the world. It's funny, we were actually just talking about this in our church service today, the whole thing of leadership. And yeah, let's see how one of the main leaders of this book, Woodrow Call, kind of how they throw a bit of a light on him. And so this is before they leave for Montana, when they're still just getting ready to do the cattle drive from Texas to Montana. So it's quite early in the book. Yes. Let's see if I can find it here. This one. Okay, yeah, so doesn't really lead up to it very much in the book itself. It just said, I guess as a contrast, Augustus, he's the chatty one. He's always kind of talking, and Call would be his sort of polar opposite. So anyway, kind of starts off, this one little passage goes, so Call got a plate of food and he went off by himself to eat. So that's something, and it's something that he had always done, which was moved apart. So he could be alone and think things out a little. In the old days, when he first developed the habit, the men had not understood. Occasionally, one of the men would follow him, wanting to chat, but they soon learned better. Nothing made Call sink deeper into silence than for someone to come around and start yapping when he wanted to be by himself. I kind of appreciate that myself. Virtually all his life, he had been in the position of leading groups of men. Yet the truth was, he had never liked groups. Men he admired for their abilities in action almost always brought themselves down in his estimation if he had to sit around and listen to them talk, or watch them drink, or play cards, or run off after women. Listening to men talk usually made him feel more alone than if he were a mile away by himself under a tree. Kind of interesting. He had never really been able to take part in the talk. Could be probably why he doesn't like it. The endless talk of cards and women made him feel more set apart, and even a little vain. If that was the best they could think of, then they were lucky that they had him to lead them, which was what he thought. It seemed immodest, even to him, but it was a thought that often came to him. And the more he stayed apart, the more his presence made the men nervous. And then Gus chimes in, and back to a previous conversation they had, and he says, well, you know what? It's hard for normal men to relax around you, Call. You ain't never been relaxed yourself, so you don't know what you're missing. Pshaw, Call said. P.I. goes to sleep around me half the time. I guess that's relaxed. Nope, that's worn out, Augustus said. If you didn't work him 16 hours a day, he'd be just as nervous as all the rest. And then Call left them. He's had this thought. He's got his plate of food, and then he goes over to talk to old Bolivar, the cook. And he actually has a bit of an interesting exchange with Bolivar because, they're all just gearing up to get ready to go on this huge cattle drive. Nobody knows, when or if any of them are coming back. The old cook, Bolivar, who's Mexican, he's got a wife and like 5 or 6 kids back in Mexico. And Call kind of notices that, like Bolivar, he didn't even go say goodbye to his wife or even tell them that he's leaving, right? Call actually picks up on that, and he actually says, Call wants him to come along, but then he says, he goes, Bull, we're leaving today. He said, you can have your wages if you'd rather. Bull just looks annoyed, and then he shakes his head and doesn't say a word. And Augusta says, well, I'm glad you're coming with us, Bull. You'll make a fine Canadian. And that's it. So, interesting.
Yeah, super interesting. And one of the things that I always feel kind of conflicted about it in some ways of him going off on his own, because when you read the first two books, you realize actually it has nothing to do with leadership. He's never been good with people, right? So that's, you know, kind of it's that whole, like, if you're a thin supermodel, which came first, the supermodel or the thin, right? You know, he's done that because that's been how he's always been. Before he was even a leader, he would go off by himself.
Yeah, well, I think, as we were kind of talking about today too, so this little bit of insight into Call's character early on, like before all the events of, you know, the rest of the book happened, we kind of talked about how kind of static, I guess, some of the characters kind of seem, and it's like there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of growth with some of them. Even though all this stuff kind of happens to them, but later on in the book, Call does kind of reflect on his sort of leadership role, right? And that's after they get to Montana. They kind of they've survived, or those that did survive the trip, they get to Montana, and I think this is the part just before Call has to go off and kind of try to rescue Gus, who's gotten himself in trouble. And there's an exchange about some of the men that are being left in Montana, right? And like, they're like, oh, are these guys going to be okay if you take off, Call, or whatnot? He's like, you know what, these guys are always okay, is kind of what he says, not in so many words, but, well, in so many words. He says, these guys are okay. They're actually very capable men. It's kind of like they just don't know it. Because Call is always around, and he's always the most capable man. But the second he takes off, these guys, they're perfectly able to fend for themselves. But him being around makes them not, I guess, want to fend for themselves.
Well, it's important to remember in the Hat Creek Cattle Company, and this is said by many of the hands under him, is that, and they don't, and the men reflect that they don't feel bad just when Call's gone. They feel bad when Call and Gus is gone. I think that that there's no reflection here about what Gus brings, which is the human side, right? So Call is direction and work ethic and getting things done. But I don't think most of the men would have stayed around if it had just been him, because at night when they retire, they get the conversation and the card games and the human side. And actually, it's Gus that drives Call to be more human, to make sure the men get their ways, to blow off steam, to bring understanding to Call of what it's like to be in love, to understand there's more out of life than work, right? So that's one thing I would say about that. But the other thing I would say is, I get Call too, because I won't learn the names or anything about any of my favorite authors or musicians, because I think the moment they talk, I'll lose respect for them. I like them through their written work and that only, and I just feel like I don't want to make some mistake and then end up not liking them. So two things, and they're totally didactic, right?
Well, it's almost like you don't want to know who that creator is as a person. you like their creation, you're afraid to find out who they are as a person. I kind of get that too.
And I almost feel like I don't have a right to know that too. This is a sidetrack, because I'm not looking for a friend. I'm looking for a book to read or an album to play.
Yeah.
I'm not going to marry them. I don't need to know who they are as a person. I'm fine with just knowing them through their works.
Yeah, see, I'm kind of the opposite. I don't really care to delve too deeply into a creator's, personal life and their business, but I kind of want to know what drives them to create the things that some people create, especially around like musicians and stuff, right? It's interesting to know what actually motivates people to do what they do.
Well, that might be an interesting point then too. Like if you're looking at what drives them to create, if Colin would maybe had more understanding of the human condition, he would understand, because he's actually not talking about the men, he's talking about other leaders. When he sits with other leaders, he loses respect for them because they talk about women in card games, but perhaps he would have a deeper understanding of them because he only knows leadership through one paradigm, orders and work.
Well, as is kind of exposed, I think, in some of the earlier books, well, the first couple books of the series, Call is he's almost traumatized by the poor leadership that him and Gus and some of the other Rangers are exposed to. Like they're sent out into these crazy, dangerous situations out on the plains of Texas where they got no food, like they're poorly equipped. Early on as a young man, Call, I think, is he swears up and down that when he becomes captain, like his men are going to be well equipped. They're going to be well provisioned.
I need you to stop tapping under the table or I'm going to have to remove that. Okay. I know you're a musician. Yep.
Fair enough.
Okay, yeah. So anyway, sorry.
Carry on. Okay. So yeah, I guess that's kind of what I found with Call and leadership today. And I'm trying to think of how that'll really tie into what we were talking about earlier.
Well, what weren't we talking about earlier? I guess I would say it is important to remember, and it's not often reflected on, that Gus really tempers the leadership with the men, that it's really the two of them that run the show there, and that is that livelihood. And I guess I also think that we talked about this last time about PI being driven to heroics once he had a wife and children. And Call couldn't understand that. He just said, I need you to go. And he was expected to go. And that Call really lacks an understanding on, even in this book, you could see it with Dish Bogat when he leaves in the winter and takes his chances to leave Montana for love. Call really doesn't understand what drives anybody outside of himself. He really can only understand. He doesn't even understand himself. He does what he does, and he's good at leading people for that one thing, but probably not very good at understanding.
Yeah. Like I guess he's made a lot of sacrifices. I suppose he's sacrificed living a lot of life to be the worker and the leader that he is. I guess a lot of the characters, would be, you could say that they're probably fairly lucky that Call is a good, and he's an honorable person to his core. I could see how you could find a lot of leaders, and say even in today's sort of climate, a lot of leaders who say are leaders but don't have leadership quality and are only there because that's their, only selfish inclination. Call feels the drive to lead because I think it's just what he does.
I think he does because he suffered so much under so many poor leaders in the beginning of the books that you're right in saying it shaped him. It really shaped him. And the laissez-faire attitude when those leaders had poor leadership of the actual sacrifice they made of the men they sacrificed unnecessarily because either just poor organization, lack of understanding, or one thing that I found interesting, so I just finished Dead Man's Walk again, and it was a theme that we can see today. So he's, Call's reflecting in there, he's like, I thought this guy went to West Point, and I thought this person went to Harvard, and I thought this was supposed to be the cream of the crop, and they didn't even provision us well or set a guard. And he laments in there about how there is actually a disconnect from these elite institutions and what they say they put out in terms of leadership, smarts, and intellect, and what actually ends up coming about. And what you find out is that these are people that in Dead Man's Walk often never took responsibility or had society push responsibility on them. Like nothing happens to them when they lead and lose their troop. Nothing. They get to have dinner and they go home and the troop goes to POW camps, right?
Yeah, that actually kind of ties in pretty good with some other books I've been listening to about the American Civil War. And so the events of the Civil War, oddly enough, take place just before the events of this book. And because I think even in Dead Man's Walk, some of those...
But it's in Comanche Moon. The Civil War appears in Comanche Moon.
Yeah, and so in the actual historical Civil War, a lot of generals and whatnot, these guys that got trained up at West Point and these kind of fancy schools, they end up there, and they end up in their general roles not because of their merit, but because of who their father was, their standing in society,
their social class. Yeah.
And a lot of these people, and it's kind of funny with the Civil War. It seems like a lot of them went into this war with a whole different understanding of what they thought war actually was. They thought that these rich elite generals, they were going to ride up there, and all these opposing guys were just going to throw down their guns, and because that was the right thing to do, and blah blah blah. They didn't really think it was going to be this long drawn, devastating, the bloodiest war in history. Like, they had no idea what they were getting into, and they had no idea what leadership actually was. And strangely enough, the North, from what I'm understanding, which outnumbered the South more than 2 to 1 and could outproduce them easily, they very nearly lost to the Confederates because of their crappy leadership. And the Confederates often said, like, you know what, one Confederate soldier is worth 10 of those damn Yankees, or whatever. Right? And they very nearly proved it true, I guess. But in the end, the North just outproduced them. But it was in spite of some of the terrible leadership they had to endure, up until you get leaders and guys like Ulysses S. Grant and then Sherman kind of come along.
I don't know much about the Civil War, but it's interesting.
It's real interesting. Yeah, then you find some of those characters, like people based on some of those characters, wind up in the Lonesome Dove books too, leading people like Call and then traumatizing the hell out of them. Yeah. Because their leadership is so rotten.
Yeah, and it's interesting. So how he takes that on, and maybe that is an idea of like having a more horizontal or flattened leadership model, right? Where
I think
he is with the people. So the other thing is he goes, the thing that strikes me as you're saying that is he goes away at night. I think he was doing that before he was a leader, only he just sat at the campfire and wouldn't talk, which he was already separating himself. But then I think in the day, so something interesting also in this book, before Dish Boguet comes to work for them as their top hand, which is quite an interesting thing too. He was going to go work for Shanghai Pierce, and talking about that, and then you learn just in that little blip that Shanghai don't ride with the guys and the cows. He takes the train and shows up where they are at the end. So it's interesting that Carl goes away at the end, but he does all the same work as the men in the cattle drive. He's driving the cows. He's eating that same food. He doesn't have a special tent at all. And in fact, when they get to the end, he lives in a tent while they live in a house. That I think he's punishing himself, but it's interesting to know that when it comes to the actual work, he's out there doing the wells, he's out there shawing the horses, he's doing the work with the guys, the same work that they would do as well.
Yeah, to a certain extent. Call wasn't like digging wells with them. He's usually shodding horses or whatnot. But it kind of reminds me of like an old adage, even just like from my own personal experience as a tradesman, right? And there was the one sort of year and a half where I was the supervisor and led a group of guys. And one thing I always heard, and it was in terms of leadership and like I guess being a boss, was a lot of guys said you can't be boss and a friend to the guys at the same time. Those are two hats you can't wear. And I always kind of thought that was interesting. Like, well, all right, well then do you end up ruling or leading by fear, like making them fear you? Because that doesn't seem right either. Not that that's anything that anybody would ever have to worry about from me, but I think with Woodrow Call, I think to a certain extent the guys do kind of fear him because he's almost superhuman in a way, right? With the crazy amount that he works, and he only works. He doesn't drink. He doesn't whore around like the rest of them. Like he's superhuman. Right?
Yeah, he doesn't dare anything.
And yeah, his one foray into kind of love with the one whore Maggie, that is very briefly kind of mentioned in here, and then Call makes a huge mess of that whole situation. And I think he's also traumatized by that experience as well. But
well, I don't know about by the experience, but by the fact that he didn't step up and do the right thing, and he knows it. No matter how much he goes away or tries to distract himself, that's always there for him.
So if you look at Augustus's leadership sort of qualities, so Gus is kind of everyone's buddy in the book, but Gus is also known to be just as capable as Call, and like just as good of a fighter. Call himself even kind of comments that he has sometimes wondered if he could actually match Gus if Gus actually rose to the occasion and applied himself and really tried, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. So one thing though that makes me, and this has been on my mind lately, is if that whole you can't be a friend and a leader. Well, nowadays you can't even be a friend and tell your friend the truth, because you're not supposed to say anything negative to anybody and this and that. So I wonder if that's actually true, or that's just an offshoot of that. You can't say what's on your mind to people anymore. Like if your friend is being a poor worker, I mean, and it takes a little bit of teasing and stuff, and we've lost kind of that. So I think that might not be true. I think that's maybe illusion we live under because we don't do conflict well. People don't take on criticism well. People don't know how to be friends anymore. So friendship mostly looks like lying and saying everything that person wants to hear, it seems like. And I'm just wondering now if this is that manifestation of it, because there's another scene in the book that I really like, and it's this is after they have the two Irishmen that they rescue from Mexico, and they bring them up, and the two brothers, and the one's a bit of a crier. He cries a lot.
They're both
sings sad songs, cries a lot. And so Gus starts making, Augustus says, well, he's prone to tears. It must be his nationality. And his brother says, oh no, that's just Sean. He's a baby. He's a crybaby. And it was like, well, yeah.
Well, they also do point out that Bolivar, the Mexican cook, throws a whole lot of chili peppers in everything he cooks, and young Sean, the Irishman, they are not used to that, and he's sometimes weeping just from these chili peppers that are in this thing.
Sometimes you can correct somebody without correcting them too. Where it's not in their face, and
Yeah.
And you can also just let somebody be who they are. That's one thing. They really accept that guy that's a crybaby because he just keeps on working. It's like not everybody is good and bad. Everybody is overlooking probably an equal amount of shit about you as you are about them, and we forget that. And so what I found was interesting is they were willing to overlook the crybaby because this kid, even though he's terrible at the beginning about what he was doing, he tried so hard. Yeah. And there was nothing that they wouldn't do. They never had a staunch ear. They would get down and do things. They would take the horses. They would take their drink. But just the fact that they were prepared to serve in that community bought them overlooking that the one was a big crybaby.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the two Irishmen they're basically lost and homeless. They've got nothing. The guy polishes off the last bottle of whiskey that they got, and they got nothing. So Call does keep them around because, there's nothing he can't ask them to do, and they will at least try it, even though they got no idea what they're doing at the start. I mean, they eventually do learn, and it's pointed out that their voices, their ability to sing really calms the cattle as they're driving them up there, and that becomes an invaluable thing. And then all the men on their thing too learn to love these two guys, and their singing, and their singing kind of mellows everybody out, kind of keeps things calm, and
it seems to there's something about that the human side of it, right? And
if he sings a little too sad, that's kind of pointed out that it makes the men a little moody. They get a little sad based if the Irishmen are singing the sad songs or whatnot.
But it calms the cows, so we're gonna keep doing
it calms the cows.
Yeah.
I think when he's driving them at night, like when he's on night shift and singing to the cows, he sings a little sadder songs because he misses his home, his wife, his brother.
Yeah, you could explore the ideas forever, and what I keep coming back to is McMurtry. He does such a wonderful job of the characters and how they grow and change, and I think in that it's a real depiction of real life. Nobody's stagnant, right? And nobody's got all good characters and all bad characters. Yeah. And we are kind of made in twos, right? And we are social creatures that's why a shared leadership model is sort of best, is because it's hard to believe that any one person could encompass everything that a group would need. And this has come up between me and you, that a dissenting voice is important, or something from the other side, that we run in a dichotomy, and that can be equally as important to a leadership model as listening to, a voice over here that's not often heard. Brings a lot.
Mm-hmm. It does. Well, that could be our maybe another chat. Could be circling back to where we started with this, where I think I kind of said some of the characters seem to be a little stagnant, but I kind of meant that they don't seem to learn from their mistakes. And I guess some of the characters I'm thinking about along those lines would be like July Johnson, the sheriff, Clara, who I know Gus's former flame,
Jake Spoon.
Jake Spoon, makes mistake after mistake, refuses to learn, refuses to change. I think this one surrounding Call, that first passage there, that one kind of rang true, because later on in the book, it does show that when he's got to go take off and go rescue Gus, and some of the guys are afraid of him taking off, he's got to say to them, you know what, you guys are all capable men. You'll be just fine. I've got the utmost confidence in your ability to actually not only keep driving this thing, but take care of yourselves, and you'll be fine.
And they do.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. I think that does wear on people, to have somebody in their community that does the same thing over and over again. And I think in some ways people wouldn't be so half as bad, and they kind of just accept who they are, right until them doing that drags other people into it, starts making negative experiences for everybody else, right?
Well, one good balance, and this kind of just has occurred to me as well, I guess when you're talking about Call and how he likes to pull himself back from the group and the crowd and the men and all that, and he eats separately, he camps and lives separately out in his tent. He keeps everybody at arm's length. Whereas Gus is the opposite. Gus brings everybody in. He's doing his loud, boisterous talk. He'll say anything. He's always joking around. He's always got the whiskey jug and the card deck handy. But they're both good, I think, at not showing favorites amongst any one particular guy there as well. Because the second you show favorites amongst a group of men, especially in this situation, that can sow other problems, right? Mm-hmm. Oh, so-and-so, you're the favorite of so-and-so, right?
The one thing that strikes me in it too is just how much they tease each other, but in a serious way of you know what, we're tired of hearing about you being scared of the river. If you get any more scared, we don't want to hear this or that. And I always think, gosh, man, if a sensitivity reader ever read these books, they'd be devastated. They'd have to change the whole book.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that comes out of the whole cattle drive too, right? And these guys, they're setting out to do something that's never been done at this time, and that's take a herd of cattle from Texas and drive them up to Montana, which is totally wild, unsettled territory. Mm-hmm. And so this group of men, which is just this mishmash of you got a couple of seasoned cowboys and Dish and Jasper and these guys, a bunch of young kids like Newt and the Spettle boys and all this. They come together and they really have to gel, and you can imagine that these older seasoned cowboys would have taken those younger guys under their wing and really, move them along.
And the Irish guys.
And the Irish guys, and they're always ribbing each other. Dish, the lead hand, he's always always taking a good ribbon from all the other guys, and he dishes it out too. Yeah. But that's an interesting part of the story too.
Yeah, I really appreciate it.
Also goes back to leadership, right? So.
Yeah. If anybody else has listened to or read these books and has any suggestions of ideas to explore, we'd love to hear from you. But for now, we'll just keep talking about them. I mean, they've had such a great influence in our lives. I'm really enjoying them.
Yeah, me too. Well, as we kind of discover more and more points and how many things from this one book have tied into not only our lives, but just things that are going on today in the world, right? You can see you're sorely lacking leadership. And I wish we had a Woodrow Call or a Gus to kind of step up right now and take the reins of this place. See what happens.
Well, we will.
Somebody usually does.
So thanks everyone for tuning in again for Lonesome Dove LIMIN-tations, and we really enjoy going through and looking at these books, and we're hoping to make this a weekly part of our channel. So thanks again for tuning in. Take care, everyone.